When we moved into our new home on Via Lucca, I wasn't planning to create an entirely new body of work. At first, I thought I was simply designing paintings for a new home. I assumed some of my earlier pieces would work here. I hung a few and lived with them for a time. A few are still there, quietly holding space. But over time, I realized something deeper was happening. The house itself was slowly influencing the emotional language of my work. The light here is very different from our previous home. Softer, more diffused, more atmospheric. There are long sightlines throughout the house, moments of openness, large expanses of quiet wall space. And I began noticing that I no longer wanted highly contrasting palettes or overly energized compositions. I wanted the work to feel calmer, more integrated, more architectural. The palette evolved gradually. At first, I was simply experimenting, testing new combinations, softening colors, removing visual intensity, but certain tones kept returning. Deep blue-gray grounds inspired by the desert sky, muted neutrals drawn from stone, plaster, wood, and shadow, and glowing coral forms inspired by sunrise and sunset. The coral surprised me. For years I tended to work with bolder, brighter palettes, deep reds and oranges. But this coral feels different. It feels like an evolution, less decorative, more atmospheric. Against the blue-gray grounds, the forms almost seem to generate their own internal light. I've become fascinated by that relationship, not dramatic contrast, but quiet luminosity. The new palette slowly became less about color itself and more about emotional temperature, how stillness feels, how softness feels, how restraint feels. I wasn't trying to match the interiors exactly. I wasn't interested in creating decorative art. What interested me was emotional continuity. I wanted the artwork and the architecture to feel connected somehow. Not identical, not coordinated, but in conversation with one another. Almost as though the paintings emerged naturally from the atmosphere of the house itself. One of the things I've come to appreciate about this stage of life is that I feel less interested in visual noise, less interested in excess. I find myself more drawn instead to subtlety, nuance, breathing room. And I think the new palette reflects that evolution too. The colors are quieter than my earlier work, but emotionally, I think they may hold more depth. There's a confidence that comes from not needing every element to demand attention. I've also watched my creativity change over time. Not necessarily becoming smaller, but becoming more distilled, more essential. The process of creating this palette was not linear. Some paintings went through dozens of refinements. Colors shifted slightly warmer, then cooler again. Forms were softened. Edges disappeared. contrast was reduced. Again and again, I found myself asking, what can be removed? What can become quieter? What allows the composition to breathe? I create many of these paintings digitally in Procreate before they are printed at large scale. Some have not yet been printed, and I still don't fully know how they will feel physically in the space. That uncertainty remains part of the process. Working digitally allows me to experiment intuitively with scale, atmosphere, transparency, and proportion. I often live with a composition for many weeks, moving forms subtly, testing emotional reactions, observing how the palette interacts with the architecture of the rooms. Sometimes I print smaller studies just to see how a piece lands emotionally. That flexibility has become an important part of my workflow, especially for the larger works designed specifically for the great room and long hallways at Via Lucca. I think many of us are craving spaces that feel calmer now, less crowded visually, less demanding emotionally. And maybe that's one reason I've become increasingly interested in artwork that creates atmosphere rather than simply making statements. For me, this palette became an exploration of quietness, not emptiness, not absence, but quietness as presence. Quietness that still holds warmth, emotion, depth, and light.